Red Bull have been in the centre of attention as of recently due to the latest rule change of the FIA, when the governing body added a simple sentence in Article 11.1.2 that could change the entire narrative of the team's dominance. Obviously, the FIA stated that there hasn't been any team that's been breaching this rule, but a mid-season change suggests otherwise, and the fall in performance of Red Bull that has been primarily related to the lack of balance on the car speaks in that same narrative. With all of this in mind, could Red Bull really have exploited the illegal braking system on their car? And if so, will the next 10 races be a further downfall for the team in both of the championships? It's safe to say that all eyes are on Red Bull right now, not just because of the upgrades that do not seem to be working like they've been scheduled to, but also because of the latest regulation change by the FIA. As of now, Article 11.1.2 states that the brake system must be designed so that within each circuit, the forces applied to the brake pads are of the same magnitude and act as opposing pairs on a given brake disc. The way that this is written is very easy to understand. The brake pads should generate a clamping force on each of the 4 brake discs that the car possesses. On the other hand, the actual brake balance reading that we can visualize on the steering wheel of the car, which is in the range of 54 to 58%, is a percentage of the total braking pressure that is applied to the front axle, and that number is always 100%. Therefore, it's easy to understand that there's a difference in the clamping force in the direction from front to rear, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the clamping force on each brake disc across a given axle has to be the same. This is why that particular sentence we've just mentioned won't be changed in Article 11.1.2. However, a new one has been introduced, and it states, any system or mechanism which can produce systematically or intentionally asymmetric braking torques for a given axle is forbidden. If you're having a hard time understanding this, it's about closing a loophole that revolves around the torque steer, which has been looked somehow as a grey area from the F1 teams as well as the FIA. This is why a mid-season change implies that some of the teams on the grid, despite what the governing body has said in the past couple of days, have been able to find ways to extract the maximum potential out of this grey area. And with the latest edition of the new sentence, the FIA has closed the loophole that they have in the current regulation. Right now, the steering regulations are all about the steering wheel and how this operates with the steering rag, and in turn the front axle. And by this, there's no acceptance of geometrical changes to the rear suspension. What can be understood from this is that the 4-wheel steering is ultimately forbidden, and many F1 experts believe that the team that will suffer the most out of this regulation is Red Bull due to their massive advantage they've had with the stability of the car in 2023, as well as the first 5 races of 2024. Even though the Austrian team have now linked the lack of stability with a lack of correlation with the new upgrades that the RB20 continuously brought from Miami onwards. Of course, the F1 regulations aren't solely written by the FIA. Even though the governing body has the greatest amount of responsibility, F1 also has its own say in this regard, as all of the teams on the grid are trying their best to optimize the results given the current regulation cycle that they've been found in. Therefore, the latest rule has also been implied on the 2026 regulations as well, because if something is labelled as a grey area from F1 and the FIA, then it's their job to close this so-called area for the next cycle of regulations and prevent teams from using these loopholes in order to gain performance, thanks to sneaky tricks. If you close one door, however, another one opens, and it's up to us to wait and see whether any of the teams on the grid will try to benefit a lot from another loophole that would potentially open from this braking technique being closed up perfectly by the FIA. But the second half of the season holds so many answers, and with Red Bull being quite pessimistic about the remainder of this season, as well as the next 18 months in general, as Horner predicted very close battles up front, these small changes will be massively important for where the teams would end up in the pecking order. The torque steer is quite an important part of how an F1 car maneuvers, because the cars have an offset in terms of the braking pressure on either side of the car, especially when the driver comes off the brakes. If one side is slower to reduce in pressure than the other one, then it automatically creates a torque steer in order to help the car with the rotation and reduce the chance of understeer. The current cars are very prone to understeer due to their weight and the ground effect that's been quite difficult to understand for the majority of the teams not named Red Bull. Therefore, if some of the teams have been using the torque steer in their own favour, it would mean that the balance during braking and entering corners, as well as exiting them with more speed, would be quite easy to accomplish. which are some of the primary things that we'd have to pay attention to for the remainder of the season as well as 2025. Right now, the pressure is on Red Bull because the team has been adamant that the car hasn't acted the way it should with their latest upgrade. And again, they are adamant that it's nothing to do with the rule change or the addition of the new sentence in Article 11.1.2. It's just the fact that they've been unable to widen the operating window of the car due to the new concept they've been chasing. For example, Helmut Marko has had some strong words to say about the RB20, emphasizing the importance of Max Verstappen's ability to tame it in these situations, when the machinery wants to do one thing, but the Dutchman is giving his best to try and not allow it to snap out of his hands. This hasn't exactly gone in favour of Perez, who's been underperforming heavily once the RB20 started its struggles, as he scored only 28 points in the last 5 races, which is poorly 3.5 points per race during this span. Talking about the car in general, Marko stated, "At the start of the season we had a car that was as balanced as the McLaren is now. It could handle all tracks and all conditions. Then we took a wrong turn somewhere. The car has become a beast that only Max can tame. The team made the car more and more unpredictable. It became more and more difficult to set it up and balance it. Max's qualifying laps in Spa were special, but the dominance was gone in the race. We're just like Mercedes were at the beginning of the year. We're sometimes fast and sometimes slow, depending on the conditions. Sometimes we're struggling in the same race, as in Silverstone where it rained in between. If the behaviours of the car are more predictable again, Perez will also regain his pace." Even Pierre Wache has gone on to talk about the flaws of the RB20's upgrades, stating that while it's easy to add downforce to the car, it's extremely difficult to find it where the car actually needs that downforce, due to the lack of correlation between the simulator and the on-track data. This seems to be an issue that was present with Mercedes as well as McLaren in their early stages of development of their respective challenges. But given the fact that both of these teams were able to fix their problem, this sounds like nothing but an excuse from Wache, as they're unable to understand how the car has gone from what's been winning races with 20 or 30 seconds of advantage to one that's failed to win a race in the last 4 venues. What this goes to show is that Red Bull is not going to have an easy time finding more performance out of the car. And with the competition being super close behind, especially in the constructors category, it would be interesting to see how the team will survive this challenge. Obviously, they're betting heavily on the Verstappen factor, but the points difference in the Drivers' Championship could easily go in Norris's or Hamilton's favour if the slump continues, as even Verstappen doesn't believe that they have a chance to fight for the win in his home race in Zandvoort. The solution won't come easy, and Verstappen himself stated that he doesn't feel like he's driving the best version of the car. And when elaborating on this situation to a greater extent, the 3-time world champion said, "I probably push harder than I did last year. It's just not coming anymore to have these great lap times. So then I guess it just means that we're a bit slower and we have some work to do. Simple as that." With all of this in mind, do you think that Red Bull has what it takes in order to return to their old ways and fight for both championships in a dominant fashion? Or do you think that we finally have a 3-team battle at the front with the potential of Ferrari coming back if they're able to fix their bouncing issues from Monza onwards? Let us know in the comments below, and once you do that, make sure to click on the video that appears on your screen right now.